Welcome to Sherlock Shadow Channel, where every story hides a secret. Grab your coffee, sit back, and dive into a world of twists and turns. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let the adventure begin. Hercule Poirot and the Case of the Gardenia That Didn't Wilt. Chapter 1. The Gardenia Mystery. The moonlight poured through the towering windows of Thornwood Hall, painting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Inside the grand foyer, the hush of late-night conversation was broken only by the soft rustle of silk and the distant chime of a grandfather clock. Lady Winifred Carrington, resplendent in a pale green velvet gown streaked with silver embroidery, held a delicate porcelain tray of petit four as she greeted her final guest of the evening. The annual Carrington Gala had always been the social event of the season, but tonight's gathering carried a curious undercurrent of tension, one that even the most well-bred lady could not disguise. From the top of the sweeping staircase, Hercule Poirot surveyed the assembled party with his piercing grey eyes. His impeccably waxed moustache twitched slightly as he noted the subtle signs of unrest. The sharp corners of Lord Carrington's jaw, the way Ashcombe's hands trembled ever so slightly when she raised her champagne flute, the quick glance that Professor Aldred exchanged with his wife, revealing a storm of unease behind polite restraint. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with anticipatory delight, for beneath the veneer of elegance lay threads of motive waiting to be unravelled. At precisely 11:30, a shrill scream rang out from the east wing. Champagne flutes shivered in their hands, and silk skirts swirled as guests hurried toward the sound. Poirot, with the grace of a dancer, stepped forward, then paused, raising a slender finger. "Mes amis," he murmured, voice calm but commanding. "Let us proceed with caution." The grand doors of the music room were flung open to reveal a sight that froze the blood of every soul present. Lady Sylvia Carrington, the family's youngest daughter, lay sprawled, her gardenia corsage perfectly intact against the pristine white of her evening gown, yet motionless on the floor. The mystery had begun. Chapter 2. The First Clues. Hercule Poirot remained a silent observer as the guests milled around the music room's threshold. The air was thick with shock and confusion, yet he noticed that something else pervaded the atmosphere, a careful suppression of panic. Lady Winifred Carrington, pallid yet composed, hovered near her husband, offering strained comfort. Mrs. Ashcombe pressed a lace handkerchief to her lips, her eyes darting toward every face in the room. Professor Aldred adjusted his spectacles as though seeking clarity in the glass. And throughout it all, Poirot detected the faint scent of gardenia, as though the flower's fragrance clung to every surface, mocking the tragedy. Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Mes amis, we must approach this methodically. First, let us observe the scene." He stepped forward in 3 precise strides and knelt beside Lady Sylvia Carrington. Her form was eerily graceful, as though posed for a portrait. In her right hand she still clasped one of the black keys from the piano, an odd choice, for no piece containing that note had been arranged for tonight. Poirot gently eased the finger free and placed it on a sheet of blotter paper, careful not to disturb any smudges of powder. "Note the powder on her fingertips," he murmured. "From a compact she never carries. Who among us might possess such an object?" He rose and circled the grand piano, studying its open top. The music sheet resting on the stand, a nocturne by Chopin, bore a single blot of moisture in its lower right margin. There is no drink spillage here, no stained carpet or damp linen, yet this note is wet. It suggests someone handled it moments before Sylvia's collapse. Poirot's gaze swept the assembled circle. But who among us sought to ruin evidence, or perhaps to introduce it? A soft footstep drew his eyes to the carpet edge. A slight tear in the burgundy pile, just beneath the edge of the piano stool. It aligned perfectly with a scuff on the polished floorboards, indicating the stool had been shifted and then dragged back. "Observe," Poirot said, pointing. A brief struggle occurred here. The stool moved 2 feet backward, yet the purse placed upon it remains open and untouched. The culprit did not seek valuables. He paused, unless the purse was a distraction. Lord Carrington's butler, Thomas, swallowed visibly. "Sir, I served Lady Sylvia her refreshments. She carried no purse afterward. She placed it here when the music began." Poirot nodded. "Thank you, Thomas. Your recollection is precise. Now, let us consider the Gardenia corsage." He lifted the pristine flower pinned to Sylvia's gown. It was affixed at 5:30. The florists close at 7, and yet 5 hours later the petals remain fresh, no droop, no browning. In this heat, gardenias wilt swiftly. Someone preserved this bloom. A murmur ran through the onlookers. Mrs. Ashcombe gasped, pressing fingertips to her cheeks. "Surely that is irrelevant, monsieur. Perhaps it came from a cooler." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "yet the only refrigerated room in Thornwood Hall is the pantry, which is locked after dinner service. No one enters there without permission." He tapped his temple. "Tell me, did Sylvia linger there?" "No, she did not," Lord Carrington replied, voice strained. "She stayed with her guests until the scream." Poirot's thin lips curved. "Intriguing. Now, notice the handwritten note found upon her person." He unfolded the small paper sealed with black wax and read aloud, "You cannot hide forever." A threat delivered in haste. Notice the irregular slant of the letters, as though written by someone left-handed, perhaps. The script is smaller than Sylvia's own handwriting, minute and hurried. Silence enveloped the room. Even the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to pause its ticking. Poirot refolded the note with gentle care. "Our victim received a warning, yet she confided in no one. The author of this threat moves unseen among us." He drew a steadying breath. "Mes amis, the first clues are before us. The inexplicably preserved gardenia, the misplaced black key, the moist Chopin sheet, the thwarted struggle, and the fatal warning note. Each offers a thread. We must pull them in turn." Mrs. Ashcombe's voice trembled. "What shall we do, Monsieur Poirot?" "First," he said, straightening his cravat, "we remove all distractions. No one may leave Thornwood Hall. All doors will remain guarded until my inquiry is complete. Second, we assemble in the drawing room. There, we shall compare observations and determine who among us had both means and motive. Third," he paused, fixing his gaze on Professor Aldred, "we speak individually, in private, with each guest, for the truth often hides in the spaces between words." As Thomas moved to secure the double doors, Poirot allowed himself a small, private smile. The wheels of his little grey cells began to turn, weaving patterns from the evidence laid out before him. In the silent corridors beyond the music room, the deepest currents of secret design were already in motion, and only Poirot's keen mind could chart their course. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. The corridor beyond the music room was hushed, save for the distant murmur of anxious voices and the measured click of Lord Carrington's boots on the polished floor. Poirot led the way, cane tapping softly, until they arrived at the drawing room, its lofty windows curtained against the moonlight. There, the remaining guests formed a semicircle. Lady Winifred Carrington, composed yet visibly shaken; Mrs. Ashcombe, her breath still catching; Professor Aldred, brow furrowed; the Carringtons' long-time family physician, Dr. Pembroke; and the elusive Mrs. Eleanor Finch, a confidant of Sylvia's who had arrived late and claimed ignorance of household routines. Thomas stood aside, ready to bar the doors at Poirot's signal. Poirot surveyed them with his customary poise. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice calm, "we now convene as witnesses to a most unfortunate event. Each of you knew Lady Sylvia Carrington, and each of you had, I understand, some reason to be here this evening. Allow me to introduce you fully, that no detail may escape our scrutiny." Lady Winifred stepped forward. Her pale cheeks contrasted sharply with the dark velvet of her gown. "I am Winifred Carrington, widow of the late Sir Edwin Carrington and mother of Lady Sylvia. Tonight was meant to commemorate Sylvia's engagement, a joyous occasion." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, your devotion to your daughter is evident. Yet grief may cloud recollection. Pray, tell us, did Sylvia speak to you of any anxieties this evening?" Lady Winifred clasped her gloved hands. "She seemed well until the scream. We spoke only of trivialities, her new jewellery, her hopes for travel." Her voice trembled. She mentioned nothing of threats. Next, Mrs. Ashcombe moved forward, smoothing the lace at her throat. She was young, with dark hair swept back in an elegant chignon, and eyes that darted at every edge of the room. "I'm Clarissa Ashcombe," she said, voice low. "Lady Sylvia and I were close friends since childhood. I was to be her bridesmaid next month." Poirot's gaze softened. "Madame Ashcombe, your friendship with Sylvia was indeed long. Have you any insight into her private concerns? Any quarrel? Any confidences?" Clarissa's lips quivered. She pinched her fingers together, raising them to her mouth. "Sylvia received a letter earlier. She was disturbed, but she would not show it to me. I regret now that I did not insist." Professor Aldred stepped into the light. He was tall and lean, his pinstriped suit unruffled despite the late hour. "I am Marcus Aldred, Professor of Classical Literature at Cambridge. Sylvia and I share an academic acquaintance. She sought my advice on her thesis regarding Gothic symbolism, nothing more." He spoke with measured reserve. "I know nothing of her personal affairs." Poirot studied his expression and noted the slight tremor in Aldred's left hand. "You claim to have seen no letter, yet the threat note found upon her person indicates she was frightened." Aldred's lips parted, but he said nothing. Dr. Pembroke, a stout man with round spectacles, adjusted his coat. "I am Dr. Henry Pembroke," he announced briskly. "Physician to the Carrington family these past 12 years. I examined Sylvia this afternoon, found her in excellent health. Any medical cause for collapse can be ruled out." Poirot nodded. "Your expertise is invaluable, Doctor. Yet even good health cannot shield one from intentional harm. You were not present at the moment she fell?" Pembroke hesitated. "No, monsieur. I was attending to another guest in the East Wing, Lady Ashcombe's aunt, who suffered a fainting spell." "And where is that aunt now?" Poirot inquired. "In her chambers resting," Pembroke replied. "She is unaware of Sylvia's fate." Lastly, Mrs. Eleanor Finch, a woman whose porcelain mask of gentility barely concealed restless ambition, stepped forward. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I am Eleanor Finch," she announced, voice tinged with brittle strength. "I met Sylvia through a charitable society. We had disagreements, Creative differences, if you will, but our friendship was cordial. Poirot observed the tension in her jaw. Creative differences? He prompted gently. Finch swallowed. Sylvia and I planned a joint fundraising gala for next month. She insisted on themes I found too avant-garde. I expressed my reservations. How did she react? Poirot asked, steepling his fingers. She dismissed them, Finch admitted. There was an argument. I left in anger. A hush fell. Poirot allowed the silence to deepen, letting each person absorb the implication. Then he spoke again, softer. And still you came tonight, knowing she would be here. Finch's composure faltered. She looked down. I had promised support. Poirot's eyes turned inward, as if consulting his own thoughts. Now, mes amis, let us recall the movements of the evening. Each of you encountered Sylvia at different moments. Speak plainly, that we might piece together her last hours. Lady Winifred was first. I saw her in the East Wing hallway at 11:15. She was alone, as I recount now. Her expression distant, almost sorrowful. She nodded to me but did not speak. Professor Aldred interjected. I passed her in the library some minutes earlier. She carried that music sheet. She said she wished to practice before the recital at midnight. Mrs. Ashcombe chimed in. She asked me to fetch her compact from her salon, but I was delayed by Lady Ashcombe's aunt's faint. She looked at Pembroke. Is she well? Yes, Pembroke replied. She will recover. Of course, Clarissa said, voice pitched with relief. Sylvia seemed impatient with the delay. I offered to accompany her, but she insisted on privacy. Dr. Pembroke nodded. After attending to Lady Ashcombe's aunt, who by then was resting comfortably, I saw Sylvia slip through the gallery doors toward the music room. Eleanor Finch closed her eyes. I spotted her too, as I returned from the conservatory. We exchanged polite words, and I went in search of her to reconcile what we argued. But by the time I reached the music room, the doors stood ajar, and the scream pierced the hall. A final quiver of silence. Poirot tapped his cane gently on the carpet. Thank you, all. Your recollections paint a timeline of Sylvia's final movements. Yet details conflict. The timing of the compact retrieval, the moment of audience for her practice, the location of Lady Ashcombe's aunt. These shall require further scrutiny. He lifted a small notebook and turned it to a blank page. We shall continue this inquiry in pairs, one by one. For now, mes amis, reflect on your motives. Who among you feared Sylvia's decisions? Who envied her success? Who sought to protect a secret? I shall speak with each shortly. As the guests exchanged uneasy glances, Poirot allowed himself a moment to study them. Lady Winifred's sorrow, Clarissa's regret, Aldred's reserve, Pembroke's professional detachment, Finch's brittle ambition, all masks hiding something deeper. He closed his notebook with finality. The circle of suspects is complete. Let the little grey cells guide us now. In the quiet tension of the drawing room, the perfect balance of suspicion and intrigue held them all in thrall. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. A hush fell over Thornwood Hall as the heavy oak doors at the far end of the drawing room swung open, admitting a slender figure in evening dress. Hercule Poirot paused on the threshold, his perfectly polished shoes clicking softly on the Persian carpet. The candlelight flickered against his impeccable cravat and gleaming waistcoat, illuminating a face of calm composure and alert curiosity. Beneath arched brows, his grey eyes surveyed the gathered assembly with the precision of a master surgeon poised at the operating table. mes amis, he intoned in his clipped accent, voice measured yet laden with authority. I apologize for my delay. Matters of transport and punctuality are, alas, not always under one's control. He inclined his head to Lady Winifred, who gave a grateful nod, though still pale with anxiety. But rest assured, I am here now, and nothing shall escape my attention. The guests shifted in their seats, each reacting to Poirot's presence in his own way. Mrs. Ashcombe's delicate frame trembled with relief. Professor Aldridge's posture straightened, yet a flicker of apprehension passed across his pince-nez. Dr. Pembroke offered a curt nod, professional and reserved. Mrs. Finch, lips pressed firmly, managed a tight smile that betrayed brittle nerves. Thomas, standing by the door, bowed deeply and closed it securely behind the detective, ensuring no one came or went unobserved. Poirot closed the distance to the center of the room in 4 perfectly measured strides. He tapped his cane twice on the rug, then steepled his hands before him. Let us summarize our situation. Lady Sylvia Carrington lies in the music room, her life stolen under mysterious circumstances. We have observed several clues: the preserved gardenia, the black piano key, the wet Chopin sheet, the torn carpet edge, and the cryptic threat note. Now I must hear from those in authority. What is the official position of the local constabulary? At this, Lord Carrington stepped forward, shoulders squared despite obvious distress. Inspector Harding arrived shortly after the scream, he explained. He examined the scene, questioned the butler and the maid, and has declared that Lady Sylvia's death was due to acute poisoning. He cites traces of digitalis in her system, he believes administered in a spiced wine served earlier. A murmur rippled around the room. Mrs. Ashcombe's eyes widened. He said spiced wine? She broke off, glancing at Pembroke. Dr. Pembroke held up a hand. Yes, digitalis can be delivered in wine, and Miss Carrington did consume a glass at the banquet. But that does not explain her clutching the piano key, nor the struggle indicated by the furniture, nor, indeed, does it account for the gardenia's miraculous freshness, or the wet music sheet. Poirot inclined his head. You see, mes amis, the inspector's theory addresses the method of demise, but neglects the broader tableau of evidence. The poisoning may indeed be true, but the circumstances surrounding it suggest a staged scene. He paused, letting the words sink in. When one wishes to conceal a crime, one might rely on the subtleties of botany. Digitalis is a common poison in our gardens, but to lure suspicion away from one's own handiwork, one must distract the observer. He turned to Mrs. Finch. Madame Finch, you claim to have returned from the conservatory shortly before the scream. The inspector questioned you briefly. Tell me, what did you observe in the music room upon your approach? Finch's composure wavered. I saw the doors ajar and heard a cry. I entered, and there was Sylvia on the floor. I saw her corsage intact, and I noticed at once the peculiar position of the piano stool. But I did not stay long. I was overcome with shock and returned here. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And yet, when Thomas and the maid arrived, the stool had crept 2 feet backward, as our previous observations show. There was time then for someone to enter, shift the furniture, and perhaps smear the music sheet before Sylvia succumbed. Professor Aldridge spoke up, adjusting his spectacles. But surely the poison would have taken several minutes to work. She must have collapsed some time after drinking. His voice rose with indignation. How could an assailant both administer poison and stage such a scene unnoticed? Messieurs, madames, Poirot said softly, raising a finger. Underestimate not the ingenuity of a desperate mind. Consider the gardenia, placed hours before the crime, yet preserved? Who among us had reason to maintain its freshness? The cook, the gardener. Neither frequent this room. He swept his gaze across the suspects. And what of the powder on Sylvia's fingertips? It matches none of the compacts found upon these ladies. A deliberate planting of false evidence, or a genuine mark of struggle? Lady Winifred swallowed. Monsieur, we must trust the inspector's experience. Her voice trembled with pleading emotion. He has handled many such cases. Poirot offered a gentle smile. Experience is invaluable, madame, yet it must be guided by observation and reason. Let us not assume the simplest explanation, for the simplest is often false. He turned to Dr. Pembroke. Doctor, you have examined Sylvia's body. Can you confirm the presence of digitalis and tell us at what time she likely ingested it? Dr. Pembroke consulted his notes with professional detachment. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. The levels indicate ingestion approximately 20 minutes before death. Given the temperature of the hall, absorption through the digestive tract would have been near immediate. Thus, she must have consumed it between 10 and 20 minutes before the scream. Poirot tapped his chin with his cane, eyes distant in thought. Very well. That places the administration around 10:30. Yet we know Sylvia drank from her glass at the banquet around 10 o'clock, not later. This suggests someone refilled or tampered with her wine. He turned once more to Clarissa Ashcombe. Madame, you carried the spiced wine from the buffet to Sylvia's table. Did you notice any change in its aroma or appearance when you poured her glass? Clarissa faltered, brushing a loose curl from her face. It looked the same. I tasted none. I was distracted by Lady Ashcombe's aunt fainting. Poirot's lips curved. Ah, yes, the fainting aunt. Her collapse drew many of you away. A convenient diversion, n'est-ce pas? Who among us would benefit from drawing attention elsewhere while the wine was altered? No one spoke. Poirot let the silence stretch. Then he pronounced softly, Mes amis, the official theory of accidental poisoning disguised as natural death is insufficient. We have layers of intrigue, a staged struggle, a preserved Gardenia, a warning note, and misdirection through secondary ailments. The murderer here sought more than death. They sought to send a message. He paused, meeting each gaze in turn. Tomorrow, Inspector Harding will return, and he shall find his conclusions refined by our observations. Tonight, I request that each of you retire to your rooms, resting for further questioning in the morning. No one is to leave the premises, and no one shall see Sylvia's body until the coroner arrives. He held up his cane. For now, let the little grey cells rest. Tomorrow, they shall awaken to reveal what lies hidden in Thornwood Hall. With that, Poirot stepped back, allowing the gravity of his words to settle like dust in the lamplit room. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the heavy drapes of Thornwood Hall as Inspector Harding arrived to resume the investigation. Poirot awaited him in the panelled library, where a crackling fire offered reluctant comfort amid the chill of suspicion. After brief introductions, the inspector retired to his duties, and Poirot turned his attention once more to his little grey cells. As agreed, Poirot said, gesturing toward the door, I shall conduct preliminary interviews. You may observe, Inspector, but do not intervene. The inspector inclined his head gravely. By all means, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot summoned Lady Winifred first. She entered, looking pale but resolute, and sat in a high-backed leather chair. Poirot seated himself opposite, steepling his fingers. Mademoiselle, he began softly, I wish to understand your mother's last conversation with Lady Sylvia. You told us yesterday it was banal, but I sense a deeper sorrow." Lady Winifred closed her eyes, as though gathering courage. Sylvia confided that she felt something unnatural. She spoke of a chill in her dreams, of being watched. I dismissed it as fanciful. She has a habit of dramatizing minor fears. Poirot nodded. "And when did she first mention this feeling?" "2 nights ago," Lady Winifred replied. "She awoke in the guest wing and found the windows unlocked. She blamed the wind and asked Thomas to secure them." "Did Thomas confirm this?" Poirot asked. "Yes," she said, "but Thames wines seldom enter these corridors." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And did Sylvia suspect anyone of wrongdoing?" Lady Winifred hesitated. "She said she thought someone close, someone with access to her rooms, was behind it. But she refused to name names." "Interesting," Poirot murmured, tapping his cane. "One more question. The compact powder found on her fingers. You said Sylvia did not carry one that evening?" The mother shook her head. Her compact always bore a silver clasp. This was plain black. "Plain black," Poirot repeated, eyes narrowing. "Thank you, madame. You may go." Lady Winifred rose and left, leaving Poirot to summon his next subject. Clarissa Ashcombe. Clarissa entered, cheeks flushed and eyes red-rimmed. Poirot offered a sympathetic nod before beginning. "Madame Ashcombe," he said, "you told us Sylvia asked you to fetch her compact. Is that certain?" Clarissa swallowed. I thought she did. But in retrospect, perhaps she only glanced toward the salon." Poirot inclined his head. "Memory can be clouded by emotion. Tell me instead of your relationship with Sylvia. Had you disagreements?" Clarissa nodded slowly. "We argued about the bridesmaid dress. She wanted something avant-garde. I favored tradition. It became heated, but we reconciled. I regret now that I did not remain by her side." "And did she trust you with private matters?" Poirot pressed. "She was guarded," Clarissa admitted. "She would confide in no one completely." "As you experienced yourself," Poirot noted. "Finally you carried the spiced wine to her at 10 o'clock. Did you notice if her glass was ever empty?" Clarissa looked away. I saw that she refilled it herself later, possibly from a decanter near the mantel." "And did you pour that refill?" "No," Clarissa said softly. "I attended Lady Ashcombe's aunt. When I returned, Sylvia held the glass." Poirot smiled faintly. "Your guilt is not mine to judge, madame. Thank you. You may leave." Clarissa departed, and Poirot turned to Professor Aldred, who stood waiting with composed detachment. "Professor," Poirot began, "you found Sylvia in the library at about 10:15. You spoke of her practicing her nocturne. Was she alone?" Professor Aldred adjusted his spectacles. "Yes, I left her to her music. She seemed calm, focused." "Did she mention any guests lurking?" Poirot inquired. The professor peered over his glasses. "Number. But I heard footsteps in the corridor, as though someone loitered beyond the door. I assumed it was the maid." "Emily," Poirot murmured. "That brings us to her." He turned to Harding. "Inspector, will you fetch Emily the maid for questioning?" The inspector nodded and left. Aldred cleared his throat and continued, "I saw nothing untoward. Yet, when I returned 10 minutes later, Sylvia was gone." "Gone to the music room," Poirot said. "You did not accompany her?" He shook his head. "I had to attend a lecture here at the hall this afternoon. I regret not escorting her. Poirot tapped his chin. Regret is of little value. Thank you, Professor. Next, Dr. Pembroke entered. Poirot studied his round frame and practiced demeanor of sterile professionalism. Doctor, Poirot said, you were called away by Lady Ashcombe's aunt. Do you feel her faint was genuine? Pembroke straightened his coat. Completely genuine. A typical vasovagal incident, no cause for alarm. And did you examine Sylvia afterward? Yes. I checked her pulse and saw no sign of distress. She left the atrium of her own accord. Yet your medical bag was missing when you returned, Poirot observed. Dr. Pembroke's brow furrowed. Missing? That is what Thomas reports. The bag was here beside the doctor's chair. When you returned after 20 minutes, it had vanished. Pembroke's face turned ashen. My bag. I do not recall moving it. Poirot nodded slowly. We shall confirm with Thomas. Thank you, Doctor. Finally, Mrs. Eleanor Finch entered, a statuesque figure of brittle poise. Madam Finch, Poirot began gently, you and Sylvia quarrelled over the charity gala. Yet you returned to seek reconciliation. Finch's lips trembled. I loathed our argument and regretted my harsh words. Did you approach her in the music room? She hesitated. Yes, I intended to apologize. I knocked, but the door was ajar. I entered and saw her collapsed. Did you touch anything? Poirot asked. Finch swallowed. I touched her hand to check for pulse. I closed the piano lid and left to summon help. A considerate act, Poirot said, yet one that might obscure evidence. He paused. And your black-gloved hands could have brushed the gardenia. Finch's composure cracked. Monsieur, I wished only to help. Poirot offered a small bow. As do we all, madame. Thank you. After the interviews, Poirot stood gazing at the empty chairs. Each suspect had revealed fragments, some unwillingly, the missing powder compact, the absent medical bag, the refilled wine, the footsteps in the library corridor, each clue a shard of a larger design. Inspector, Poirot said, please compile these statements. We shall study them in detail. Tonight I will retire my little grey cells, but tomorrow they shall awaken anew, sharper than ever. Inspector Harding bowed. Very good, Monsieur Poirot. As the door closed, Poirot allowed himself a moment of reflection. The gears of motive and opportunity whirred in his mind. The initial interviews had begun to crack the perfect facade of Thornwood Hall's stately occupants. He smiled to himself, knowing that the truth lay buried within these broken confidences, and that soon the final pieces would fall into place. Chapter 6. First false lead. Late that afternoon, the sun dipped low beyond the manicured gardens of Thornwood Hall, casting long golden shafts through the library windows where Hercule Poirot and Inspector Harding pored over their notes. The statements of the guests had been meticulously transcribed. Lady Winifred's fear, Mrs. Ashcombe's regret, Professor Aldridge's whispered footsteps, Dr. Pembroke's missing bag, and Mrs. Finch's tear-touched hands. All bore fragments of truth, but fragments alone did not form a whole. Inspector, Poirot said, tapping his cane against the soft carpet, it is time we follow the most blatant of leads and see if it holds water. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Dr. Pembroke has inadvertently supplied us with a convenient culprit. A physician is never without motive when tampering with poisons is concerned. Harding frowned. You think the doctor poisoned Sylvia? He had access to digitalis, of course, kept it in his bag for legitimate purposes. And it has vanished. Precisely, Poirot murmured. A bag containing digitalis tincture and tablets gone missing at the moment of crisis, the very image of opportunity, yet we must guard against too swift a judgment. Nevertheless, let us pursue this line. He rose and retrieved his hat. Come with me to the East Wing. Moments later, they stood before Dr. Pembroke's chambers, a modest suite of a sitting room and study. The door was ajar. Inside, shelves of medical tomes lined the walls. A fold-out desk held quills and an inkpot undisturbed. Harding entered first, gun holster clicking at his side, followed by Poirot, cane in hand. Harding surveyed the room. No sign of a bag here. Nor anywhere else, Poirot observed, lifting a loose rug by the fireplace. No trace of recent disturbance. They examined the wardrobe drawers and under the chaise longue. At last Poirot pointed behind a low stool. There lay a black leather satchel, its strap stretched as though hastily tossed aside. Harding picked it up and unlatched it. Inside rested syringes, tongue depressors, and, most damningly, a small vial labelled Digitalis Purissima. The inspector's eyes glinted. "Here it is," Harding said, voice tight with triumph. "He couldn't have removed it without placing it here now. He's our murderer." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Superb discovery, Inspector. Now we shall confront Dr. Pembroke. But first we must test our assumptions." He extracted the vial and held it to the light. The liquid was clear, viscous. He tapped it with a fingertip. "Would you care to taste a drop, Inspector?" Harding recoiled. "Of course not. We'll secure it as evidence." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. He replaced the vial carefully. "Let us now speak with the doctor." They left the chamber, closing the door behind them. In the hallway, Lady Winifred hovered near the top of the stairs, anxious in her gaze. "Inspector, Monsieur Poirot, any progress?" Harding straightened, brandishing the satchel. "We have found Dr. Pembroke's bag, Lady Carrington, clearly misplaced in the music room after the incident." The mother's face blanched. "You believe the doctor is responsible?" Poirot offered a gentle smile. "Madame, one must follow the most telling evidence, but do not yet condemn the doctor. I wish first to hear his explanation." They descended to the grand hall, where Dr. Pembroke awaited with professional calm. He looked between the inspector and Poirot with mild puzzlement. "You wish to see me, gentlemen?" Harding held up the satchel. "Doctor, this is your medical bag, yes?" Pembroke's expression flickered. "Yes, of course. I misplaced it when I rushed to Lady Ashcombe's aunt this morning." "Misplaced?" Harding echoed. "It was found in your chambers only moments ago, perhaps hidden there deliberately." The doctor's composure wavered. He licked his lips, spectacles slipping. I admit I panicked. When I discovered Miss Carrington collapsed, I fetched my bag to administer first aid, but then realized she was beyond help. I was uncertain how to proceed, and I returned the bag here in haste." Harding narrowed his eyes. "Then why did witnesses see your bag absent when they interviewed you?" Pembroke swallowed. I had left it in the music room to carry supplies, but I was distracted. My mistake." Poirot gently interjected. "Doctor, you told us that the fainting of Lady Ashcombe's aunt required your immediate attention. You remained away for 20 minutes. During that interval, Lady Sylvia collapsed. You returned to find your bag missing from the chair." Pembroke's hands trembled at his sides. "Yes. I do not know how it disappeared." Yet, Poirot continued, we found it here, hidden behind a stool. A curious place for a bag belonging to the manor's physician. He paused, studying the man's features. Tell me, Doctor, was there any reason you wished to conceal its contents? The doctor's shoulders slumped. No, monsieur. I swear I only feared being blamed if poison were discovered. My reputation... He trailed off. Harding looked satisfied. Case closed. You had both motive and means, Doctor. At that moment, Poirot raised a finger. Inspector, let us not be too hasty. Dr. Pembroke is convinced of his innocence, and yet would a murderer leave his own tools at the scene? Better to destroy them or remove them entirely. Pembroke's eyes widened. But I did remove them. I gave them to Lady Ashcombe's aunt's maid for safekeeping. Harding spun. Which maid? The one in blue, Emily, the doctor said. She took the bag to the pantry and was to return it after locking it away. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Indeed, we must verify this at once. He turned to the inspector. Inspector Harding, kindly escort me to the pantry. We shall find our false lead. They hurried back through corridor after corridor, arriving at the pantry door. The cook, wearing a flour-dusted apron, held the bag in her hands, concern etched on her face. Emily, Poirot said gently, is this the doctor's bag? She nodded, handing it over. He gave it to me when he rushed past. I locked it in the ice chest per his instructions. Inspector Harding retrieved his key and opened the ice chest, a sturdy wooden box lined with metal. Inside, amid bottles of cream and butter, lay the bag. He lifted it free, and Poirot unlatched it again, revealing the digitalis vial intact. Poirot turned to the cook. Madame, you observed no one else in the pantry when this was stored. Emily shook her head. The corridor was empty. I heard footsteps, but no voices. Poirot addressed Harding. Our false lead collapses, Inspector. The doctor removed his bag in panic, entrusted it to Emily and forgot. A simple oversight, not malice. Our focus must shift. Harding nodded reluctantly. Very well, Poirot, but he remains a person of interest. Of course, Poirot agreed. Yet we must now pursue more subtle currents. The doctor's misstep was not murderous intent, but human error. He paused. Let us reflect on what this teaches us. The murderer is careful enough to stage a struggle, preserve a Gardenia, and conceal threats, but not so careful as to impersonate panic. Or are they manipulating us further? As they left the pantry, Poirot tapped his fingers thoughtfully. The first false lead had been laid bare, and with it, layers of assumption peeled away. In the quiet of Thornwood Hall, a more elusive danger still lurked beneath artful misdirection, awaiting the moment when Poirot's little grey cells would expose its shape. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The evening chamber of Thornwood Hall had been transformed for a modest dinner, a long mahogany table set with gleaming silverware, crystalline glasses, and flickering candelabras whose warm glow danced upon polished portraits of stern Carrington ancestors. Outside, the gardens whispered beneath a velvet sky, but within, an even firmer breeze ruffled nerves. Hercule Poirot presided at the head of the table, Inspector Harding stationed discreetly at the rear, and the 5 principal suspects arrayed on either side. Lady Winifred Carrington, Clarissa Ashcombe, Professor Marcus Aldred, Dr. Henry Pembroke, and Mrs. Eleanor Finch. The atmosphere crackled with unspoken tension. Poirot raised his glass of iced water, a neutral choice to avoid any further tampering. and spoke in his mellifluous French accent. Mes amis, tonight we engage not only in sustenance but in conversation. Let us dine and converse candidly, so that the reactions of each may unveil hidden truths. He dipped his spoon into a delicate bisque. I propose a little game. I shall address each of you in turn with a question. Observe your fellow diners, for their responses will be as revealing as your own. He turned to Lady Winifred, whose composure wavered only slightly at the directness of his gaze. Madame, tell us of the letter Sylvia received. You said she mentioned nothing to you, yet the ink upon the threat note suggests recent composition. If you had known of her fear, what would you have done? Lady Winifred's slender fingers trembled as she wrapped the napkin on her lap. I would have protected her, of course, she replied firmly. Her voice caught, betraying her grief. I would have confronted the sender, torn the house apart to find the culprit. As she spoke, Clarissa Ashcombe's hand twitched around her wine glass, even the water glass, leaving a smudge on the rim. Poirot caught the movement. Indeed, protection is a mother's first instinct. But what if the danger came from within? Would you trust your own staff, your own circle, to be above suspicion? His words hovered in the air like a flickering moth. Lady Winifred's eyes flicked to Thomas the butler, who stood beyond the doorway, silent and unwavering. She offered a wan smile. One must trust until given cause not to. A subtle tremor ran through the assembly. Poirot turned his attention to Clarissa. Madame Ashcombe, you told me you regretted leaving Sylvia alone when she fetched her compact. But suppose that moment was when the threat materialized. How do you reconcile regret with opportunity? Clarissa's cheeks flamed coral. She sipped her water and then set it down with deliberate care. I have no consolation for my tardiness, but guilt does not equate to wrongdoing. She met his gaze with fierce eyes. I would ask you, monsieur, would you suspect a friend from a single misstep? Poirot inclined his head. Friendship can blind, madame, yet a misstep may also be premeditation in disguise. Let us recall your argument with Sylvia over the bridesmaid's dress. Would you describe your words that evening as mere preference, or did they carry the sharper edge of resentment? Clarissa swallowed, her voice low. It was a quarrel, yes, but animated by love. We reconciled afterward. At this, Professor Aldred cleared his throat and raised his glass of wine. Poirot's eyes flicked to him. Professor, you heard much in the corridor outside the library. Footsteps, you said. Was it merely the maid, or did you entertain other thoughts about whom you encountered? Aldred's fingers traced the rim of his goblet. I assumed it was Emily, he conceded. Yet now I wonder if it was someone more calculating. Someone who sought to cultivate an alibi by feigning distance. Poirot's lips curved into a subtle smile. Ah, the cultivation of an alibi. Remarkable how we guard ourselves with distance or feigned innocence. Dr. Pembroke, you sought to shield yourself by entrusting your medical bag to the pantry, and yet you forgot. How do you explain such forgetfulness in one so disciplined? Dr. Pembroke, pale beneath his customary reserve, cleared his throat. Panic, he said simply. Not forgetfulness. Panic. He pushed his plate of roast pheasant aside. I cannot claim innocence on the grounds of perfect memory, but I swear my hands sought only to help Sylvia. Poirot nodded gravely. Help, yes, but help can be a mask for harm. Consider, mes amis, how easily trust may be manipulated. He set his fork down, and addressing the company as a whole, continued, We have before us two flowers, the gardenia that did not wilt and the threat that consumed Sylvia's courage. Both were nurtured by someone here. Which flower represents guilt and which innocence? A hush fell. Then Mrs. Eleanor Finch spoke, her voice crisp as autumn air. I would say the gardenia, a deliberate flourish, intended to shock and divert. She looked around with keen eyes. It is far easier to preserve a bloom than to forge a handwriting, non? Poirot gave a small nod. An astute observation, Madame Finch. Yet deception need not be complex to be effective. A hand pressed into powdered petals may retain their freshness by removing moisture, an action but slightly more taxing than pressing ink to paper. Finch's eyes widened. She drew in a sharp breath. You suggest someone manipulated the corsage after it was affixed? Precisely, Poirot replied. The notes of action were laid out in the music room, powder traces, swapped wine, the black key, the tear in the carpet. But consider the human element, the panic, the whispered threats, the misremembered steps. All are notes in the same melody. The assembled guests sat in pensive silence, the silverware before them untouched. The only sound was the faint ticking of a clock and the soft crackle of the fire. Poirot lifted his hand as though conducting an invisible orchestra. Mes amis, let us conclude this game with one final prompt. Each of you hold a motive: envy, fear, regret, ambition, devotion. Tonight I ask you to speak that motive aloud, not quietly in your hearts, but here, before us all. He paused, eyes alighting on Clarissa. She exhaled and whispered, I envied her ease of spirit, her beauty. I thought it right to challenge her, to show her tradition held value. Clarissa's gaze wavered, tears glistened. Poirot nodded and turned to Lady Winifred. She lifted her chin. I feared for her life. My last thought was to shelter her, yet I failed. Her voice trembled. Professor Aldred spoke in measured tones. I admired her brilliance. I resented that she trusted me only as a teacher, not a friend. His admission hung heavy. Dr. Pembroke cleared his throat. He paused, swallowing hard. I feared her death would tarnish my reputation. I panicked when I could not save her. A gasp issued from Finch. Poirot turned to her at last. She met his gaze and said, I desired her success for our gala, yet I feared her vision would eclipse mine. That fear, I could not voice it to her. Poirot allowed a moment's silence before speaking. Beautiful confessions, my friends, yet confession is but the first step toward absolution, or accusation. He rose, placing both hands on the table. The psychological game is a test of wills. Some of you broke with honesty, others remain stone-faced. We shall see which faces mask truth and which reveal it. He tapped his cane. For now, let us clear the table and rest. Tomorrow we advance to the next stage of discovery. May your dreams be gentle, for daylight brings its own revelations. As the candles guttered and the guests departed, Poirot lingered by the hearth, eyes reflective. The seeds of doubt had been sown deep. In the fertile soil of human weakness, the true culprit's confession might yet sprout, if only the detective's little grey cells could nurture it to bloom. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. Morning light filtered through the mullioned windows of Thornwood Hall, illuminating the atmosphere with deceptive serenity. The events of the previous evening, poison, struggle, and whispered confessions, hung like a pall over the grand estate. Yet before Hercule Poirot could resume his inquiries, an urgent summons arrived. Dr. Pembroke's voice, tense and trembling, echoed down the corridor. Hurrying to the East Wing drawing room, Poirot and Inspector Harding found Pembroke standing beside an overturned tea trolley. Cups and saucers lay broken on the carpet. A silver teapot gushed steam across the Persian rug. On a nearby fauteuil, Professor Aldred sat clutching his throat, his face flushed and eyes wild with distress. "Monsieur," the doctor gasped, kneeling beside Aldred, "it is Professor. He has ingested something foul." Poirot knelt beside the professor. Aldred's hand hovered near his lips, sweat beaded on his brow. "I took only a sip of tea," Aldred rasped. "It tasted bitter, acrid." Harding gently probed Professor Aldred's wrist. "Pulse racing, Doctor?" Pembroke nodded. "Tachycardia, tremors, classic signs of an emetic or possibly strychnine. We must act quickly." Poirot rose, eyes alight with sharp calculation. "Fetch brandy and hot water, and administer milk immediately. We must dilute whatever poison remains." He turned to Harding. "Guard the room. No one enters until I have examined the scene." As Pembroke and an anxious maid tended to Aldred's care, Poirot scanned the area. The tea trolley lay half-turned. A small, dark stain marred its brass rim. He crouched to inspect, finding a few scattered tea leaves discoloured with a reddish tinge. With gloved fingers, Poirot lifted a cup, tilting its contents toward the window light. A faint residue clung to its base, crystals no larger than grains of sand. He sniffed delicately. Arsenic? Or perhaps antimony? Stepping back, Poirot straightened. "Inspector Harding." Harding approached, hand on his holster. "Yes, monsieur?" "Secure the teapot," Poirot instructed, "and have Thomas fetch me the silver sugar tongs and the tea caddy from the pantry. We must determine at what point the poison entered the infusion." Harding nodded and intercepted the butler, who carried the tongs and caddy as ordered. Meanwhile, Professor Aldred's breathing stabilized under Pembroke's ministrations, though his cheeks remained ghastly pale. Clarissa Ashcombe hovered nearby, wringing her hands. Mrs. Finch stood at the threshold, lips pressed in a thin line. Lady Winifred watched from the corridor, dread etched across her features. Poirot placed the tea caddy on a side table. He opened it, revealing a small tin of loose Darjeeling. He shook a pinch into his palm and compared its pale amber hue to the spilled leaves on the trolley. They matched. He then dusted the rim of the teapot with the sugar tongs, uncovering a fine smear of dark powder within the spout. "Observe, mes amis," Poirot said, gesturing for silent attention. The poison was introduced directly into the teapot after the tea leaves were placed. A subtle hand could have done so while preparing morning hospitality. Clarissa gasped. "But only the servants prepare tea, Monsieur Poirot." He shook his head. "Not necessarily. Dr. Pembroke arrived first to fetch his morning papers. The maid was delayed with Lady Ashcombe's aunt this morning, who, by the way, reports recovered fully and unaware of any intrusion. That leaves those among us who wish to strike again." Mrs. Finch stepped forward. "You imply one of us attempted to poison the professor?" Poirot's grey eyes glittered. "I imply that someone, fearing discovery, sought to divert suspicion by creating a new victim. Yet the dose was too small to kill, merely enough to sicken and frighten. A psychological tactic." He paused. "Let us consider motive. Who benefits if the professor is incapacitated?" Professor Aldred, supported by Pembroke, coughed weakly but managed a nod. "I was to testify on behalf of Lady Winifred in the reading of her late husband's will. It names me executor. My incapacitation could delay probate." A murmur ran through the company. Lady Winifred pressed her hand to her lips. I had no desire for such skullduggery, Professor. No, madam, Aldred rasped, but someone wished to remove me, temporarily at least. Poirot turned to Clarissa. And you, Madame Ashcombe, what is your relation to the will? She swallowed. I am named as a beneficiary for my friendship with Sylvia. Finch's lips curled with bitterness, and I, for my contributions to the estate's charitable foundation. Harding frowned. Lady Winifred, are you aware of all who stand to inherit? Lady Winifred closed her eyes. Only that Sylvia's engagement will affect the division of assets. The will was drawn up 6 months ago, naming Sylvia as principal heir, with me as guardian. Should she predecease me, the estate passes to designated friends and charities. Poirot pressed a gloved finger to his temple. So the will's terms shift dramatically if Sylvia is gone, which she is, and if the executor is incapacitated, delaying proceedings further. The beneficiary cats circle an empty dish, each tempted by circumstance. He strode to the hearth and picked up the tongs, examining the fine, dark residue. Antimony, perhaps, used historically as an emetic. It would explain the professor's symptoms. He sniffed the powder. Yes, antimony potassium tartrate. He replaced the tongs with deliberate care. But who had access to this substance? Dr. Pembroke kept none. Professor Aldred has never handled such chemicals. Mrs. Finch and Mrs. Ashcombe would not possess it, and Lady Winifred would not know of its whereabouts. He paused, gaze shifting among their faces. Thomas? The butler stepped forward, bowing. Monsieur? Where is your master key-ring? Thomas produced a small key fob. Poirot selected a brass key and opened the caretaker's cabinet in the corridor. Inside lay gardening tools, coal for the grate, and a small locked box. Poirot retrieved the box and opened it with a secondary key. Within rested vials labelled antimony potassium tartrate, experimental purposes. He placed the box on a side table. Gasps filled the room. Mrs. Finch covered her mouth. Clarissa's eyes widened. Lady Winifred's hands shook. Poirot addressed them gravely. This box belongs to Professor Aldred. He requested its safekeeping in the caretaker's quarters for his research into medieval medicines. He forgot to retrieve it, and yet the vial has vanished. Professor Aldred looked stricken. It was there last night, I swear. Poirot turned to the company. Someone seized this opportunity to borrow the professor's own poison. A striking example of misdirection. Use another's tools to incriminate someone else. He held the empty space in the box aloft. Note the symmetry between Sylvia's digitalis and Aldred's antimony. 2 poisons, 2 victims. The murderer seeks to sow confusion and divert discovery. He folded his hands. Mes amis, we now confront a secondary mystery. Who among us commandeered this poison, and to what end? Was it to protect the true culprit from suspicion, or to eliminate another obstacle? Tomorrow we shall piece together the timeline. Who handled the professor's keys, who entered the caretaker's quarters, who prepared the tea. Until then, no one may leave Thornwood Hall. Every movement is suspect, every action part of a larger design. And now, rest, for the game is far from over, and tomorrow's revelations promise further intrigue. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. Late that morning, the drawing-room of Thornwood Hall pulsed with uneasy expectancy. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting latticed patterns on the carpet, but within the room's elegant shadows lurked tangled loyalties and buried resentments. Hercule Poirot stood before a small writing desk, Inspector Harding at his side, while Lady Winifred Carrington, Clarissa Ashcombe, Professor Aldred, Dr. Pembroke, and Mrs. Finch formed a tense semicircle. Poirot began without preamble. Mes amis, we have uncovered attempts at misdirection, poisoning Sylvia with digitalis, attempting to sicken the professor with antimony. Yet these acts alone do not explain the intricate web binding you all. We must now unearth the hidden connections, those secret threads of sympathy, rivalry, and obligation that link one suspect to another. He turned to Lady Winifred. Madame, you have spoken of Sylvia's engagement and your guardianship of the estate. Yet I find that you maintain correspondence with Mrs. Finch regarding charitable distributions. Pray explain. Lady Winifred smoothed her gloves, eyes steady. Eleanor Finch and I serve together on the board of the Thornwood Relief Society. I rely on her expertise to direct funds to local hospitals. Our relationship is professional but cordial. Poirot inclined his head. And yet, Lady Sylvia's absence will redirect a substantial endowment from family to charity. Does this not concern you, Mrs. Finch? He addressed Eleanor directly. Mrs. Finch's lips pressed tight. I serve the charity faithfully. My concern is not for funds, but for honoring Sylvia's legacy. She herself designated that endowment. Indeed, Poirot murmured. But one might question why you and Lady Winifred conferred frequently in private, late into the night, according to Thomas the butler. He paused, observing their reaction. Is this mere dedication or a shared interest in shaping Sylvia's inheritance? Lady Winifred cleared her throat. The discussions were about timing of donations, not the will's provisions. But timing can be everything, Poirot replied softly. He turned to Clarissa. Madame Ashcombe, you blamed your delayed return for leaving Sylvia vulnerable, and yet I discover you and Professor Aldred share a deeper bond, a joint literary society at Cambridge where you assist with his Gothic thesis. Is that correct? Clarissa's brow furrowed. Professor Aldred invited me to review his work. It was an honor to contribute. Professor Aldred looked surprised. I did ask Clarissa's opinion. Her insight into symbolism proved useful. Poirot gestured between them. A symbiotic relationship, mentor and muse, professional and student. Yet clarity demands. Your closeness provided you access to his chambers and to the caretaker's key. You could enter when opportunities arose. He let the implication hang. How do you respond? Clarissa's cheeks flushed. My consultations occurred in his study, not the caretaker's quarters. I never borrowed his keys. Professor Aldred nodded. Nor did I lend them. The keys remained with Thomas. Poirot arched an eyebrow. Yet someone used them. We shall verify the logs with Thomas. Now, Dr. Pembroke, you treated Lady Ashcombe's aunt and Sylvia, and yet I learn you and Mrs. Finch share more than professional courtesy. You both attended medical conferences in London together, did you not? Pembroke hesitated. We did coincide at a symposium on botanical poisons. Mrs. Finch swallowed. We discussed new treatments. Nothing more. However, Poirot pressed, you exchanged letters after the conference. Reports suggest they were not strictly professional, more warmly phrased. He leaned forward. Care to explain the closeness? Finch's voice trembled. It was cordial. He admired my organizational skills. I valued his medical expertise. Dr. Pembroke offered a curt nod. Our correspondence was about setting up a local fundraiser. That is all. Poirot turned to Aldred. Professor, you and Lady Winifred share a less obvious connection. Before her marriage, you tutored her in literature. You were once engaged, I learn. Lady Winifred gasped softly, glancing at Aldred. Professor Aldred's face darkened. A scandalous rumour, Aldred said quietly. We were close in youth, but she chose another path. Sir Edwin Carrington. Poirot's eyes gleamed, yet closeness remains. Old flames die hard, as they say. Could the re-emergence of Sylvia's threat have reignited ancient passions? Jealousy? Regret? He let his gaze rest on Lady Winifred. Your concern for your daughter may conceal deeper wounds. Lady Winifred's hand shook. That is past, monsieur. I cared for him once, but I never loved him as I love my daughter. Poirot nodded. Love and jealousy are siblings. We shall return to this. Now, I invite each of you to confess any hidden financial or personal obligation to another, no matter how trivial, to complete the picture. Silence stretched. Then Clarissa exhaled. I owe a personal debt to Mrs. Finch. I borrowed funds to support my brother's studies. She requires no repayment schedule, but a promise to contribute to her charity. Mrs. Finch's eyes narrowed. A reasonable exchange as I saw it. Indeed, Poirot said, but obligations come with expectation. Now, Lady Winifred? The matriarch faltered. Thank you. I owe Professor Aldred gratitude for tutoring Sylvia in literature. Without his guidance, she would not have prepared that recital piece. Aldred inclined his head. It was my pleasure. Dr. Pembroke cleared his throat. I owe nothing to any of you except my conscience. Poirot turned to him last. And yet, Doctor, it was you who delivered medical lectures at a society where Sylvia intended to speak. Were you not mentoring her in public speaking? Pembroke's eyes widened. I advised her on presentation, yes, but that in no way implicates me. Poirot tapped his cane lightly. Obligations and alliances shape opportunities. Now let us consider. Who among you had both the motive and the means, armed with knowledge of poison, keys to strange doors and the freedom of trust? Hidden connections reveal hidden motives. He stepped back, folding his arms. We have mapped this intricate web. The final threads shall be drawn tomorrow, when we reconstruct the timeline of every key turn, every poison measured, every secret corresponded. Until then, reflect on the company you keep. Each bond may conceal a betrayal. As Poirot spoke, a distant clock chimed. The assembled suspects exchanged uneasy glances. In the hush that followed, each felt the weight of scrutiny, aware that every hidden connection uncovered brought them closer to the light of revelation, and to the justice that only Poirot's little grey cells could deliver. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. Late that afternoon, Hercule Poirot withdrew to the quiet seclusion of his temporary study at Thornwood Hall, an alcove lined with leather-bound volumes and an antique globe whose brass meridians gleamed beneath the lamplight. The events of the morning's secondary poisoning had rattled the household, Professor Aldred recovering from a mild emetic, the missing vial of antimony discovered, and the intricate web of motives mapped in agonizing detail. Yet Poirot sensed an unspoken tension. The true culprit remained at large, watching his every move. It was time for his little grey cells to forge ahead. He seated himself at the desk, removing from his breast pocket the folded napkin containing the original threat note. You cannot hide forever. Gently, he unfurled the paper and smoothed it across the polished surface. The note's black wax seal, embossed with a stylized gardenia, still glistened faintly. Poirot traced its contours with a slender finger, noting the slight asymmetry of the impression, a subtle ridge on one petal, as if struck with a seal that had been improperly aligned. He tapped the paper thoughtfully. Next, he retrieved from his jacket the ivory piano key he had obtained from Sylvia's cold hand. The black key bore 2 tiny chips at its corners, and along one edge a smear of cosmetic powder, darker than the compact left in his study, which belonged to neither Mrs. Ashcombe nor Mrs. Finch. Poirot plucked the compact from the desk drawer and compared its interior mirror with the spill he had catalogued earlier. No match. He pressed the compact's lid and found it tight. The powder inside was a cool, rose-scented talc. The powder on the key was coarser, faintly perfumed with bergamot. A light knock at the door startled him. Inspector Harding poked his head in. "Monsieur Poirot, the coroner has arrived and requests to examine Sylvia's corsage. Shall I escort him?" Poirot folded the note and slipped it back into the napkin. "Yes, Inspector. See that he conducts his duties thoroughly. Meanwhile, I require a moment's solitude." Harding inclined his head and departed, leaving Poirot alone with his mounting thoughts. He lit a solitary candle and leaned over the piano key once more. The chips suggested force, slight impact against another hard surface, perhaps porcelain. Yet Sylvia's manicured hands had not shown bruises. Who but a practiced hand could wrench the key from her grasp without injury, and why choose a black key? Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor begins with an etude on that very key, an etude Sylvia had practiced relentlessly. Had the murderer selected that key as a final message? A note of accusation rather than a simple clue? Poirot reached for the music sheet, now preserved in an envelope. He unfolded it and examined the ink blots. The moisture mark was irregular, not the clean droplet one expects from water. Under magnification, a lens he procured from his case, the blot appeared crystalline at the edges, as though a drop of glycerin had coated the corner. Glycerin used in theatrical cosmetics to produce perspiration. A stage effect, not an accident of spilled water. He paused. The glycerin blot spoke to a deliberate performance. Someone had daubed the sheet to imply a tear, a perfume accident, or surreptitious handling. But who among the suspects was versed in theatrics? Only one, Mrs. Eleanor Finch, whose work on charitable galas included staging dramatic tableaux. And she had been the first to comment on the untouched Gardenia, calling it a flourish intended to shock and divert. Had she framed herself with predictive commentary? Poirot replaced the sheet in its envelope and rose, pacing the length of the alcove. Then his eyes alighted on a small writing set atop the desk. Silver pen, inkwell, and a stack of ivory stationery bearing the Carrington family crest. But tucked beneath the stack was a single sheet with a different watermark, a crest of Cambridge University's Trinity College. He recognized it instantly, for Professor Aldred had used that paper when drafting his Gothic thesis, and it matched the watermark on the back of the threat note. A surge of excitement warmed Poirot's chest. The threat note was not written on Carrington stationery, as one might expect if the culprit were Lady Winifred or another household member. Instead, it was penned on Trinity College paper, a telling artifact bearing the professor's personal seal. Had Aldred retained a supply for his private correspondence? Yes, he had stored some sheets in his study, yet only he and those granted access to his office could use them. Poirot sat once more and read the loops of handwriting. He recalled that Aldred wrote with a heavy right hand, producing letters that leaned reluctantly to the left. This script leaned more than usual to the right, with delicate filigree along the downward strokes, a flourish only a practiced left hand could produce. That detail pointed away from Aldred himself, suggesting a left-handed forger using the professor's paper. He clenched his jaw. There was only one left-handed suspect, Clarissa Ashcombe, known for her delicate piano playing and her habit of taking handwritten notes in her lap. Her cursive often slanted sharply to the right. He had noticed it on the thank-you card she offered Lady Sylvia the night before, but how had she acquired the Trinity stationery? She would need access to Aldred's study, including the locked cabinet containing the hidden supply. Poirot strode to the door and called out, "Inspector Harding, Miss Ashcombe to my study, if you please." He replaced the paper and key and awaited their arrival. Moments later, Clarissa entered, her cheeks flushed with anxiety. Harding closed the door behind them. Poirot offered her a chair, then produced the folded note from his breast pocket and placed it on the desk between them. "Madame," Poirot began, voice serene yet electrifying, "this note was penned on your professor's private stationery." He tapped the paper. "Note the watermark of Trinity College, a detail unnoticed by others. Only someone with access to Professor Aldred's study could have procured it." Clarissa's lips parted. I have been there, yes, but always with his permission to discuss his thesis." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. But only you possess the left-handed flourish I observe in the script. Compare your handwriting in my notebook." He retrieved his small journal and opened to a page where he had discreetly copied her previous signature. "Your slanted C and the curl on your final A match this note exactly." Clarissa's face whitened. She looked at the note, then away. "Monsieur, Poirot held up a hand. "Be calm. I present this as a fact, not an accusation. Yet facts demand response. Why threaten Lady Sylvia? Why stage this elaborate ruse at the piano with the gardenia, the black key, and the staged struggle? Answer me, madame." Tears welled in Clarissa's eyes. "I did not intend to harm her. Sylvia discovered evidence of Professor Aldred's duplication of her engagement diamond. He promised to include it in a thesis on Gothic symbolism as an illustrative motif. Sylvia threatened to expose him. He begged me to intervene. I wrote the note to frighten her, to compel her silence. I used his paper and my left hand so that suspicion would fall upon him." Poirot listened intently. "You sought blackmail, not murder." She nodded, hysterical. "Yes. The powder on the piano key was a cosmetic from my dressing bag. I placed it there to mimic the professor's lab powder. The glycerin on the music sheet was my stage trick. I meant only to scare Sylvia, never to kill her. But she panicked, she fled, and someone else took advantage." Poirot folded his hands. "Madame, your confession reveals a darker truth. The note was but one chord in a grander symphony of deceit. You wished to conceal the professor's academic theft. Someone wished to conceal something even more personal." He paused, eyes narrowing. "Yet your motive absolves you of murder, though not of conspiracy. The true culprit capitalized on your misdirection." Clarissa collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Inspector Harding moved to comfort her, but Poirot raised a finger. No contact. "Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow we shall gather the final pieces to reveal the murderer who used your act of desperation to cloak a more sinister crime. For now, Madame Ashcombe, you shall remain under gentle custody, and the rest of you will retire, each of you under watch." He rose, straightened his jacket, and clasped his hands behind his back. "My little grey cells have found their kernel of truth. Tomorrow, the grand reveal awaits. Good evening, mes amis." As the candle guttered low, Poirot allowed a single satisfied smile. The secret clue had been seized, and the path to justice lay clear at last. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. The late morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the dining hall, where the heavy oak table once groaned under the weight of silver tureens and porcelain dishes. Now it stood bare, a silent monument to the violence and deceit that had transpired within Thornwood Hall's elegant walls. Lady Winifred Carrington sat at one end, her back ramrod straight, hands clasped lightly upon the polished surface. Opposite her, Dr. Pembroke stood, white-knuckled, as he set a small carafe of water before Professor Aldred, who leaned heavily on a mahogany cane. Mrs. Eleanor Finch hovered near the hearth, eyes bright with nervous intensity. Inspector Harding sat to one side, ready to intervene, while Hercule Poirot surveyed his captive circle from the ornate fireplace's marble hearth. Poirot cleared his throat. Mes amis, we are at a pivotal moment in our inquiry. Madame Ashcombe's confession has unmasked one layer of deception, yet the true murderer remains among us. Let tensions unfold, for they shall reveal what calm reasoning cannot. He motioned to Lady Winifred. Madam, you have sat in quiet restraint. Pray share with us your reflections on these unfolding events. Lady Winifred drew a slow breath, voice steady despite the tremor in her eyes. It seems that every threat and misdirection, a poisoned teacup, a staged struggle, the preserved gardenia, was but a note in a greater symphony of lies. Clarissa's confession revealed only a scare tactic, not the murder. I fear the hand that smote my daughter remains unseen. Professor Aldred's gaze flicked to Finch. And yet you, Madame Finch, insisted the gardenia was meant to shock and divert. You commented on it before any explanation. Who but the true orchestrator could detect its significance so swiftly? Finch's lip curled. I observed a flower that never wilted and spoke the truth of its oddity. Is it a crime to have a sharp eye, Professor? Aldred's cane tapped the floor impatiently. Sharp-eyed, yes, but predisposed to manipulation. Your charitable endeavors give you ample opportunity to slip through corridors unnoticed. Finch's cheeks paled. You accuse me of lurking in the shadows. I was in the conservatory until the scream drove me here. Dr. Pembroke cleared his throat. Speaking of shadows, I recall hearing footsteps in the corridor outside your rooms, Lady Winifred, around the time Sylvia fled the library. You insisted you were in your chambers, yet Thomas reports your door was ajar. He fixed her with a steady look. Care to explain? Lady Winifred's hand shot out, trembling. That is absurd. I locked myself away. Exit to these corridors would have required passing through 2 sealed doors. Inspector Harding interjected, voice calm but firm. We shall verify the logs of the household staff. Meanwhile, let us hear from Professor Aldred. You possess the professor's stolen keys, the missing antimony vial. Yet you blamed Clarissa for its removal. Now that she stands under watch, you remain free and unexamined. What is your defense? Aldred's spectacles slid down his nose. He pushed them up, inhaling deeply. I blame no one but myself for my forgetfulness. The vial was in my custody until I discovered it missing. I have no desire to harm Sylvia or any of you. My motive lay only in academic passion, not murder. Dr. Pembroke stepped forward, voice low and urgent. Yet you alone had both poisons at your disposal. Digitalis from my own bag, if you retrieved it during my panic, and antimony from your locked cabinet. You could stage either poisoning to mask your involvement. A heavy silence fell. Professor Aldred's mouth worked, but no words emerged. His cane tapped again, a staccato echo of inner turmoil. Poirot leaned forward, hands clasped. Observe how quickly suspicion flits from window to window, searching for refuge. Yet the murderer is the aviary keeper, not the bird in the cage. He met Alice Aldrid's gaze. You wielded poisons as a scholar might wield research tools, but a scholar does not conceal his notes. He publishes them. Who among you hid your intentions behind threats and toxins? At that moment, a soft footstep sounded behind them. Thomas the butler entered, bearing a tray with a leather-bound notebook, Professor Aldrid's personal journal. The inspector took it and opened to the previous month's entries. He cleared his throat. Professor, your journal records an entry dated 2 nights ago. The diamond's brilliance eclipses all else. Must be removed. What does this mean? Aldrid's face drained of colour. He waved his hands. It was metaphorical. I referred to Gothic symbolism, the diamond as light in darkness. I never meant to harm Sylvia's engagement ring or to remove anything from her person. Mrs. Finch leaned close to the journal, but the phrasing, must be removed, carries a darker meaning when combined with threats and poison. Professor Aldrid's voice cracked. You twist words. I wrote for literary effect. Dr. Pembroke snatched the journal back. Effect or intent, Professor? How did it come to pass that your diamond motif appeared in that warning note, sealed with your crest's paper? Inspector Harding flicked through the pages to the station where the threat note had been found to originate. This paper matches, but the handwriting. He looked up at Poirot for confirmation. Poirot nodded. Handwriting experts confirm that the threat note's script, though forged on Professor's paper, was left-handed, and if letters lean excessively to the right, the writer is indeed left-handed, but the Professor is right-handed. He paused, eyes sweeping the assembly. Clarissa's left-handed flourish, which I have demonstrated, and her access to both study and stationery, implicated her, until she revealed she used the note purely to frighten. There remains one motive unaccounted for, one hand unexamined. He tilted his head toward Dr. Pembroke. Doctor, I recall you were present at the symposium on botanical toxins with Mrs. Finch, and you alone know the properties of digitalis and antimony fully. You had motive to protect Clarissa once her threat note threatened to bring suspicion upon you, for her scheme risked exposing your academic interests in poisons. Dr. Pembroke's eyes widened. Me? I only sought to aid Sylvia, and then the Professor. Poirot pressed on, voice soft but insistent. Yet you were the first to provide medical attention, giving you opportunity to slip poison into Sylvia's wine and later into the Professor's tea. You panicked and misplaced your medical bag, fearing blame. You manipulated the preserved Gardenia by misting it with water stored in your satchel, preserving its freshness. And you orchestrated a struggle at the piano. By stepping on the black key fragment you later retrieved, Clarissa's threat note was but a convenient cover, a red herring you encouraged. The room gasped. Dr. Pembroke rose, tremulous. That is preposterous. Poirot's eyes glittered. Not when combined with evidence. The cosmetic powder on the piano key matched a talcum blend found in your medical supplies, the glycerin blot on the music sheet, a byproduct of your compound creams, the smear of water on the gardenia petals from your distilled water flask, and the footprint by the piano, a men's heel with a narrow sole, matches your size, not any lady's. Silence stretched, taut as a violin string. Inspector Harding stepped forward, handcuffs at the ready. Dr. Pembroke, you are under arrest for the murders of Lady Sylvia Carrington and the attempted murder of Professor Aldrid. Pembroke's face contorted in rage and despair. He sank into a chair. I did it for the sake of research, for the purity of science. Sylvia was to present my work, and Aldred was to endorse it. They both betrayed me." Poirot nodded gravely. "Yes, Dr. Pembroke. In your fear of professional ruin, you killed. But the little grey cells have triumphed." As the inspector led Pembroke away, the remaining guests sank into their chairs, relief and horror entwined across their features. Lady Winifred covered her face with trembling hands. Clarissa, freed from custody, clutched her head, sobs soft but unrelenting. Professor Aldred placed a gentle hand on Clarissa's shoulder, offering what comfort he could. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, cane in hand, eyes on the departing doctor. "Mes amis," he said softly, "the serpent is out of the garden, and justice restores balance to our little world. Yet let us remember, the garden blooms anew only when the poisons have been purged." With that, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The tensions had risen, and in their tumultuous crescendo, the killer had revealed himself. The game was over. The final notes of Poirot's symphony had been struck. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. Late that evening, the grand drawing-room of Thornwood Hall had been repurposed into a sparsely furnished chamber of judgment. Heavy drapes were drawn, and a single lamp cast pool of light upon a small table and 2 chairs placed conspicuously in its centre. Hercule Poirot stood beside the table, his posture uncharacteristically grave, while Inspector Harding leaned against the fireplace, arms folded. In the chair opposite Poirot sat Dr. Henry Pembroke, his shoulders hunched, wrists bound before him in simple cuffs. The hush that fell as Pembroke entered was absolute, broken only by the steady ticking of an ancient clock. Poirot regarded the doctor with quiet intensity. "Good evening, Doctor," he began in his soft, deliberate French. "I trust you have had time to reflect upon the events of this day." Pembroke's gaze flicked to Harding, then returned to Poirot. His voice was hoarse. "Yes, I have reflected." "Then let us converse," Poirot said, settling into his chair and placing his cane across his knees. "I wish to understand your motives, not for the record alone, but for the sake of your own conscience. You confess to administering digitalis and attempting to poison Professor Aldred. Yet you have remained silent on one critical point, the Gardenia corsage." Pembroke's eyelids fluttered. I sprayed it with my distilled water flask. I thought to preserve it, yes, but I never meant harm." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You never meant harm. And yet you told Inspector Harding that you panicked only because of misplaced evidence. But your own words, Doctor, reveal a more deliberate artifice." He paused, letting the weight of his gaze settle. "Tell me, why the Gardenia?" Pembroke swallowed, throat working. "It was to distract, to frame another. I hoped suspicion would fall on the charitable society, on Mrs. Finch, for her penchant for flowers. I see now how foolish." "Indeed." Poirot leaned forward. "But why Mrs. Finch? Why not Clarissa Ashcombe, whose note first misled us? You could have let the professor bear the weight of both attempted murders." He tapped the table gently. "Answer me truly." Pembroke's lips trembled. "Because I needed to conceal more than threats. I needed to impose a narrative of jealousy among the ladies, so that Clarissa's left-handed forgery seemed but one strand in a tapestry of feminine intrigue." He hung his head. "I thought to eliminate Sylvia privately, then let the professor's misfortune divert attention, and by the time suspicion returned to me, I would be gone." "Ah," Poirot murmured, steepling his fingers. "A narrative of misdirection so complete that even I might have been deceived until the final act. Yet you forgot one detail: Sylvia's engagement ring. Pembroke's brow furrowed. The ring? I thought to leave it untouched, an unspoiled symbol of innocence. But you handled it. Poirot produced a small velvet pouch and placed it on the table. Inside is the black ribbon from the ring's presentation box, found this morning in your satchel, stained with traces of digitalis. Pembroke's eyes widened, and he flinched. I never touched it in that way. But you did, Poirot pressed, rising to his feet. You removed the velvet ribbon to suggest no one sought Sylvia's jewels, while secretly transferring the contents of your tincture bottle. You believed that by preserving the Gardenia, tipping the scales toward feminine rivalry, and matching Clarissa's threat note, you would remain unnoticed. Yet you slipped the ribbon into your satchel, a habit born of your own meticulous nature. Pembroke's face went pale. No, I must have... The bag. His voice trailed off as realization dawned. You revealed knowledge you should not have, Poirot said, stepping closer. Only the murderer would know to remove the velvet ribbon and keep it hidden. For a true friend or foe would leave such a token at the scene. When Inspector Harding found it, you claimed panic, but now you see it was an act of design. Pembroke's shoulders slumped, tears glistening. I wanted to believe I could control every element, every clue, every suspicion. I thought my knowledge of the human heart and the properties of poisons would grant me mastery. But I underestimated your little grey cells. I see that now. Poirot unfolded his cravat and offered it gently to Pembroke. Doctor, the truth is a profound teacher. You harmed 2 souls this day, Sylvia's and your own integrity. Yet it was not jealousy nor greed, but vanity that led you astray, your vanity in believing you could stage the perfect crime. Inspector Harding moved forward and removed Pembroke's cuffs. It is time, Doctor. The coroner and the magistrate await your formal statement. Pembroke nodded, voice barely a whisper. I am ready. Poirot placed a hand on the doctor's shoulder, an unexpected gesture of compassion. May this confession ease the burden on your soul, if only slightly. Justice is served, but mercy seldom abides. Go now, and may you find peace in truth. As Pembroke was led away, Harding closed the door quietly. Poirot returned to the vacant chair, his expression reflective. In the silent aftermath, the hush of Thornwood Hall spoke of endings and of the fragile boundary between reason and ruin. A boundary only Poirot's unwavering intellect could navigate, guiding justice through the darkest of human designs. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The corridors of Thornwood Hall lay draped in shadow and silence long after midnight, broken only by the distant tolling of the grandfather clock. The household had retired, or so it seemed, yet one restless figure moved furtively through the dimly lit halls. Clarissa Ashcombe, pale and trembling, pressed her back against a tapestry-adorned wall, glancing down the corridor toward the servants' wing. In her hand she clutched a small leather portfolio, its edges worn and its contents precious and dangerous. Moments earlier, she had been questioned by Inspector Harding regarding her conspiracy to forge the threat note. Though she was not accused of murder, she feared the scandal would ruin her reputation and leave her vulnerable to civil suits from Lady Winifred. The portfolio contained her draft of Sylvia's private letters she had borrowed under the guise of helping with a charity appeal, hoping to find further evidence of the professor's duplicity. But Sylvia's correspondence revealed more than Aldrid's academic theft. It hinted at another family secret. Clarissa could not bear the thought of those letters being read in open court, and decided that desperate measures were required. She crept past the closed study doors, avoiding the staff quarters where Thomas the butler stood guard of the suspects' quarters. Her silk slippers made no sound on the thick carpets. Reaching the library door, she tried the handle. It was locked. She bit her lip, then produced a slender key she had filched from Professor Aldridge's ring earlier that day. The lock clicked softly. Inside, the warm glow of a nightlight revealed towering shelves of books and a heavy oak desk. Clarissa crossed to the desk and set the portfolio down. Fingers shaking, she flipped it open, rifling through the neatly tied letters. Each bore Sylvia's elegant script and the Carrington crest. She paused over a particular letter, its ink still fresh to her fingertips. A confession in Sylvia's hand, admitting that she had discovered an illicit liaison between Dr. Pembroke and Mrs. Finch. Clarissa realized that this revelation would implicate both parties, not just herself and Aldred. If the coroner or solicitor found this, the scandal would explode. She withdrew a matchbook from her pocket, struck a flame, and in the dancing orange light, set the letters alight. The pages curled and blackened, and Clarissa watched them darken, but one sheet fluttered to the floor, escaping the flames. Heart pounding, she stamped on it, grinding the paper to ash. Yet the fire from the letter caught a corner of the desk blotter. A spark ignited the blotter's edge, sending a wisp of smoke curling upward. "Madame?" a voice called softly from the doorway. Clarissa froze, her pulse hammering. Inspector Harding and Poirot stood framed in the arch, illuminated by the glow of the burning blotter. Harding's lamp cast steady light. Poirot's grey eyes gleamed with that keen curiosity she had come to dread. Poirot crossed the threshold with unhurried grace, his cane tapping once against the parquet. "Madame Ashcombe," he said quietly, "what mischief do we find this night?" He nodded toward the desk. "I see the remnants of letters, now charred. And here," he picked up the smouldering blotter, "you have attempted to conceal the evidence of wrongdoing, not only by yourself, but also by others." Clarissa's composure collapsed. She sank to her knees, tears rolling freely. "I had to destroy them, Monsieur Poirot," she sobbed. "Sylvia's letters. They would have ruined so many lives. I thought if I could remove them, I could protect everyone." Poirot regarded her with calm compassion. "Perhaps you wished well, but truth is a precious thing, madame, not ours to decide who may see it." He turned to Harding. "Inspector, kindly secure the portfolio." Harding approached and picked up the remaining papers, carefully placing them in an evidence bag. Clarissa looked up, desperation in her eyes. "Please, monsieur, you must understand. If those letters surface, if the scandal breaks, Lady Winifred's name, Professor Aldridge's career, Mrs. Finch's reputation, they will all suffer irreparable harm. I could not bear to see such ruin." Poirot knelt beside her. "I understand the weight of compassion, but one who seeks justice must allow truth to emerge, however painful. The scalding flames you sought to kindle only serve to obscure the clarity we require." He laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Rest now, madame. No further harm shall come to you this night." At that moment, Thomas appeared at the door, candle in hand. He drew back upon seeing Harding and Poirot. "Beg pardon, sir, and you, madame, but I heard a sound." His gaze swept the library, the blackened blotter, the smouldering ash, the torn ledger. "I thought I should fetch help." Poirot rose, brushing a few bits of ash from his sleeve. "Thank you, Thomas. Your vigilance is appreciated." He turned back to Clarissa. "Madam, you attempted both escape and erasure. Your portfolio remains intact. Inspector Harding will ensure its safe custody, and you shall remain under gentle watch until the coroner and solicitor have concluded their inquiries." Clarissa nodded mutely, wrapping her arms around herself. Harding guided her gently toward the door. "Come, madame. You will spend the night in secure yet comfortable quarters, and we shall speak again in the morning." As they departed, Poirot remained, surveying the charred desk and scattered ash. He tapped the blotter thoughtfully. "A desperate attempt indeed, mes amis," he murmured to the flickering nightlight. "But the embers of truth are not so easily extinguished." He extinguished the lamp and, with cane in hand, stepped into the corridor, leaving the library, and its dark secrets, to the scrutiny of dawn. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The hush that settled over Thornwood Hall in the early hours of the morning was unlike any before it. Even the ever-present tick of the grandfather clock seemed muted, as though the house itself held its breath. Within the panelled study, Hercule Poirot sat before the wide mahogany desk, scattered with the evidence he had gathered: the preserved Gardenia in a glass vial, the black piano key with its twin chips, the tiny drop of glycerin on the Chopin nocturne, and the single surviving ember of the charred blotter. Outside, the first pale light of dawn crept along the corridor, but inside, Poirot's lamp burned brightly, illuminating his deliberate scrutiny. He rose and walked slowly to the tall window, drawing aside the heavy drapes to admit the morning chill. Across the lawns, the dew-clad rose bushes glistened, their petals still intact, silent witnesses to the tragedies within. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and gazed at the scene, thoughts coalescing in his mind. Then he turned, eyes alight with sudden clarity. "Mes petites cellules grises," he murmured to himself. At last, the final piece. He strode to the desk drawer and extracted a slender, leather-bound journal, the coroner's preliminary report of Lady Sylvia's post-mortem. From its pages, he retrieved a single sheet marked in the margins with Doctor. Pembroke's neat script, trace of jasmine oil on corsage. Unusual. Poirot held the notation under his lamp and smiled thinly. He placed it next to the vial containing the gardenia petals, as though aligning two halves of a puzzle. The notation troubled him until he recalled the tiny amber vial found in Mrs. Eleanor Finch's evening bag during her initial search. That vial, she claimed, contained perfume. A new jasmine extract. Yet no jasmine perfume had been detected during the autopsy, only the gardenia bloom and the glycerin from theatrical makeup. Why then would Pembroke note jasmine oil on Sylvia's corsage, and how did that scent vanish from the petals? Poirot refolded the coroner's sheet and turned to his meticulous notes on the perfume sample. He retrieved from a small box a fragment of cloth, a scrap torn from Mrs. Finch's silk evening wrap, marked with a faint pattern of jasmine blossoms. He held it close to the lamp's flame, careful not to ignite the fragile silk, and inhaled. The air filled with a gentle floral aroma. Jasmine, unmistakably. "This," Poirot said aloud, "is the missing link." He placed the silk scrap beside the charred blotter remnants. Earlier, in the broken desk of the library, he had found traces of fine white ash amid the papery embers. A careful analysis, conducted at his behest by Inspector Harding using cycles of lamp soot and magnification, revealed particles of burnt wood mixed with the same jasmine pollen found on the fabric. Clearly someone had used Mrs. Finch's wrap to smother the small fire Clarissa had started. a detail overlooked by all but pointedly noted by his ever-watchful eye. Poirot's fingertips brushed the blotter ashes, and he recalled the manner in which Clarissa had struggled to stamp out the last sheet. She had been unaware of the jasmine-laced silk pressed against the desk blotter, but the jasmine ash remained, a silent fingerprint implicating the owner of the wrap. The very person who would have the opportunity, during the dinner's psychological game, to don the wrap, feel its comfort, and later borrow it to mask the fire's telltale scent. He paused, eyes narrowing. The fabric's pattern matched Mrs. Finch's wrap exactly, an item noted earlier by Thomas when he remarked on its distinctive design. Finch had indeed been in the library when Clarissa fled its sight. Her entrance had been hidden by the crowd's shift during the confrontation scene. She had ducked behind the desk, removed her wrap to approach the fire unseen, and used it to smother the burnt blotter, unaware that her own perfume-laced wrap would betray her. A quiet chuckle escaped Poirot's lips. He collected the scrap, the coroner's note, and the Gardenia vial, and placed them carefully into a manila envelope. Then he took up the black piano key and held it alongside the vial. Their chips matched, two triangular notches on opposite corners, suggesting the key had been pried from Sylvia's grasp by someone wearing narrow heels. Dr. Pembroke's own shoes, measured earlier by Thomas, matched precisely. The notch on the key's lower right corner corresponded to a shoe heel dent found in Pembroke's bedroom carpet, a detail he had tried to dismiss as related to his hurried search for his medical bag. All that remained was to confirm the final motive. Poirot returned to the diary he had seized from Clarissa's portfolio, the only page that had survived the flames. It bore Sylvia's confession of Finch and Pembroke's clandestine affair. HP visits Eleanor at odd hours. Their alliance goes beyond charity. I fear what they might do when threatened. Written in Sylvia's careful hand, the note had been partially charred, but remained legible. Thus, the true motive crystallized. Sylvia's discovery of the affair threatened to destroy two reputations, Dr. Pembroke's and Mrs. Finch's. They conspired in desperation. Pembroke, driven by vanity and fear of scandal, had poisoned Sylvia and attempted to frame others. Finch, his accomplice, had helped stage misdirection, preserved the Gardenia, and later masked Clarissa's arson attempt using her jasmine-scented wrap, never imagining that her distinctive jasmine oil would be found on Sylvia's corsage, a detail Pembroke noted in his report and then tried to erase. Poirot sank into his chair, hands clasped over the envelope. He allowed the satisfaction of perfect logic to wash over him. The final piece, the jasmine-scented wrap, had fallen into place as naturally as the dawn's first light. Rising, he donned his coat and hat and opened the study door. Inspector Harding entered, ready to begin the day's sessions. Poirot handed him the envelope. "Inspector, would you be so kind as to collect Mrs. Finch and Dr. Pembroke in the drawing room? We have one last conversation with them, together, in the presence of Lady Winifred." Harding accepted the evidence with a nod. "At once, Monsieur Poirot." As the inspector departed, Poirot stood by the window, gazing out at the dew-kissed gardens. In the quiet moment before the grand reveal, he reflected on human nature, how the smallest flourish, a spray of jasmine oil, could carry the weight of truth, and how, in the garden of motives and misdirection, it was always the final piece that bloomed into clarity. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. Late that afternoon, the principal rooms of Thornwood Hall took on an air of solemn expectation. The grand drawing room, normally resplendent with afternoon light and polished mahogany furniture, had been cleared of all but a circle of high-backed chairs upholstered in deep green velvet. In the centre, a small round table held the evidence Poirot had assembled. The Gardenia vial, the black piano key, the charred blotter fragments, the jasmine-scented silk scrap, and the final surviving sheet of Sylvia's letters. Heavy drapes were drawn to soften the glare, and the light of a single chandelier lent the scene a subdued intimacy. Hercule Poirot stood before the table, his posture impeccable, little grey cells humming with purpose. Beside him, Inspector Harding closed the door and took his station by the fireplace. The assembled suspects, Lady Winifred Carrington, Professor Marcus Aldred, Clarissa Ashcombe, and Mrs. Eleanor Finch, entered in pairs, guided by Thomas the butler. Each took a seat in turn, their faces reflecting relief, dread, or defiance, according to their own station and secrets. Poirot raised a slender hand for silence. Mes amis, we have come together to trace the web of events that led to the tragic demise of Lady Sylvia Carrington and the attempted harm of those close to her. This gathering is not merely to assign blame, but to illuminate truth, so that justice, serene and unassailable, may be served. He paused, letting his words settle. He tapped the Gardenia vial. Observe. A Gardenia preserved unnaturally fresh by distilled water, an artifice intended to divert suspicion. It was Dr. Pembroke who supplied the water, but it was Mrs. Finch's intent to frame the charitable society, for she commented on the bloom's oddity before any of us had voiced concern. He turned to Finch. Madame, you claimed you spoke only an honest observation. Yet a mere observer would not have held such certainty. You possessed both the opportunity and the motive to turn that flower into a diversion. Eleanor Finch's face hardened. She clenched her hands in her lap, but offered no answer. Poirot nodded gravely and touched the black piano key. Next, the key clutched in Sylvia's hand, a notation of accusation, for no musical performance required that particular note. It was pried from her grasp by narrow, polished heels, matching Dr. Pembroke's own shoes. A struggle was staged here to suggest resistance, but only by someone practiced in forensic detail could the pressures have been applied so precisely without bruising her delicate fingers. Professor Aldred shifted uneasily. Monsieur Poirot, he began, voice uncertain, but Poirot raised a hand to forestall him. Patience, Professor. We shall reach every confession in turn. Poirot set the key aside and gestured to the blotter fragments. Here, remnants of the crushed threat note. Charter Hall stationery bearing the Trinity watermark, torn and blackened by Clarissa Ashcombe in an attempt to conceal evidence of her forgery. Yet when she tried to smother the flames, Mrs. Finch's jasmine-scented wrap was used to mask the fire's telltale odour. The trace pollen in the ash proved its origin. All eyes turned to Clarissa, whose lips trembled. She lowered her gaze but did not speak. Further, Poirot continued, the music sheet's corner bore a drop of glycerin, unmistakable to those versed in theatrical cosmetics. He fixed his gaze on Mrs. Finch. Your profession staged dramatic tableaux, yet you denied wielding such substances. The presence of glycerin confirms your hand in staging the scene. Finch's cheeks blanched, and she sank lower in her chair, eyes wide. Poirot drew in a deliberate breath, and finally, the series of poisonings, digitalis administered in Lionel's spiced wine, antimony introduced into the professor's morning tea, both poisons at hand only to Dr. Pembroke, whose medical bag contained vials of both substances, and whose panic over its disappearance led to false accusations against others. He paused, then slowly turned his gaze to Dr. Pembroke, brought in by Harding and seated apart. Doctor, you acted with cold precision. You sought to destroy Sylvia first, staging a struggle and diversions to mask your crime. When that failed to satisfy your need for misdirection, you targeted Professor Aldred to delay the coming of justice. You manipulated every detail, each flourish and each concealment pointing back to your own vanity and fear of professional ruin. Pembroke's face crumpled, tears streaming. "It is true," he whispered. "I did it all. I feared my reputation, my work, all would be destroyed." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, Doctor, yet you overlooked the smallest flourish, the jasmine-scented wrap that revealed the accomplice, and the velvet ribbon that betrayed you as more than mere observer." He turned to Finch. "Madame Finch, your involvement extended beyond comments on flowers. You collaborated, knowing of Pembroke's plan, aiding in staging and concealment. You are complicit in conspiracy, if not in the actual poison." Finch covered her face with trembling hands, shoulders shaking. Poirot addressed the room as a whole. "Now we have seen how each clue, gardenia, key, glycerin, blotter, pollen, ribbons, forms a single strand of the cord that bound Sylvia's fate. In the theatre of crime, every actor plays a part, and every gesture betrays the hand that guides it." He pressed his cane once on the carpet. "Mes amis, we have arrived at the moment of reckoning. The law will proceed, but let us not forget. The greatest crime is to believe that one can control fate by artifice. In the end, truth emerges as the final, unerring flourish." He stood straight, eyes moving over each face in turn, offering both condemnation and compassion. "Inspector Harding, if you please." Harding stepped forward. "Dr. Pembroke, Mrs. Finch, you are both under arrest for the murder of Lady Sylvia Carrington and the conspiracy to commit murder. You will be taken to London for arraignment." As Pembroke and Finch were led away, Lady Winifred rose, her composure fragile but dignified. She approached Poirot with quivering gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot thank you enough. You have restored peace to this house, though at great cost." Poirot bowed his head. "Justice is a solemn task, madame. May this hall once again know serenity." Lady Winifred pressed a hand to her heart. "All our lives shall be changed by this, yet Sylvia's memory endures." Poirot offered a gentle smile. "Indeed, madame, in the tapestry of life, the threads of love and loyalty remain. Good evening." With that, he turned and, with cane in hand, exited the drawing room, leaving the echoes of truth to settle in the hushed grandeur of Thornwood Hall. Chapter 16. The Reveal. The morning light had grown steady by the time the remaining company gathered once more in the panelled drawing room of Thornwood Hall. The atmosphere was less solemn now, relief edged with lingering sorrow and curiosity. Lady Winifred Carrington, appearing more collected than the previous evening, took her seat beside Professor Aldred and Clarissa Ashcombe, both of whom had been exonerated from complicity in murder. Poirot stood before the still-arranged circle of chairs, his manner composed and mannerly as always. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room, "we have already assembled the evidence and named those responsible. Yet before the law takes its course, it remains my duty to recount in full the hidden design, and thus afford closure to our shattered hearth." He paused to ensure every eye rested on him. "Listen, then, to the full reveal. He touched the Gardenia vial. First, the preserved bloom. Dr. Pembroke, having administered digitalis to Lady Sylvia in her wine, required a distraction so that no suspicion might fall on him. He chose the Gardenia, fresh from Lady Sylvia's corsage given earlier. With a secret flask of distilled water, he misted the petals moments before the scream. This feat confused those who later noticed the bloom remained unfading, suggesting sinister machinations amongst the ladies, specifically to implicate Mrs. Finch's charitable floral arrangements. Poirot lifted the black piano key, placing it upon the table. Next, the key itself. Sylvia clutched it in her collapse, pinning it to the stage setting of a mysterious struggle. But Dr. Pembroke had pried the key from her fingers after she fell, bearing its twin chips, patterns that matched indentations found in the carpet of his own chamber. He then replaced the key to fabricate resistance, pinning the notion of force upon an unseen assailant. He picked up the charred blotter remnants. Then there was the threat note written upon Trinity College stationery. Clarissa Ashcombe, left-handed and acquainted with Professor Aldred's private paper, forged the note to frighten Sylvia into silence regarding her thesis discoveries, academic theft by Aldred. But once her plot was discovered, Mrs. Finch, aware of Pembroke's greater crime, used her jasmine-scented wrap to smother the fire Clarissa had kindled in her panic, hoping to erase all traces. The residue of jasmine pollen in the ash betrayed Finch's intervention and pinpointed her as Pembroke's accomplice. Poirot turned to the silk scrap. Regarding the jasmine-scented wrap, Mrs. Finch's wrap was noted for its distinctive pattern by Thomas when she entered the room that night. In the library, Clarissa's desperate attempt to destroy the letters produced a small flame. Finch seized her wrap from the ottoman, pressed it against the blotter, and crushed out the embers. Yet the jasmine oil impregnated the silk-left pollen upon the ashes, a fingerprint impossible to scrub away. Poirot paused to let the revelations sink in, then lifted the final surviving letter. Finally, Sylvia's own letter, a confession of Dr. Pembroke and Mrs. Finch's clandestine affair, proved her true motive. She planned to expose them, which would have shattered both their reputations. Pembroke's professional vanity and fear of scandal drove him to lethal desperation. Finch's devotion to his career ensnared her in complicity. They divided their roles. Pembroke administered poison and staged the struggle. Finch curated misdirection and covered up Clarissa's attempted arson. He folded the letter gently and replaced it alongside the other exhibits. Thus, the layered narrative of misdirection unraveled. The gardenia, the piano key, the glycerin, the forged note, the jasmine ash, all were brushstrokes on a canvas of deceit, each painted by a hand blinded by vanity and fear. Poirot looked to Lady Winifred. "Madame, your daughter's memory now rests upon truth, however tragic. The law will see that justice is done." Lady Winifred nodded, tears brimming, but eyes clear. "To you, Professor Aldred," Poirot continued, turning to him, "I offer apology for the shadows cast upon you. Your only fault was academic ambition, insufficiently modest, yet never murderous." Aldred bowed his head. "I am grateful, Monsieur Poirot, for your compassion." "And to you, Clarissa," Poirot said, addressing her kindly, "let this confession bring peace. Your role was misbegotten but never murderous. You sought only to guard your friend's secrets. May you find forgiveness in time." Clarissa clasped her hands. "Thank you, monsieur. I have learned that even good intentions may yield disaster." Poirot nodded, then closed with a final reflection. "Mes amis, human nature is an orchestra of virtues and vices. One misguided note can sour an entire symphony. Yet reason and justice, like an unwavering conductor, restore harmony. The criminal stage is but a fleeting performance. Truth endures as our greatest legacy. He stepped back, cane in hand. And now, let the authorities proceed. May Thornwood Hall's next chapter be one of healing rather than mistrust. With that, Poirot permitted the inspector to stand and signal the end of his grand reveal. As Inspector Harding rose to escort Mrs. Finch and Dr. Pembroke from the room, Poirot lingered a moment with Lady Winifred, offering a quiet word of condolence. Then, with measured grace, he took his leave, his little grey cells finally at rest, the tapestry of Thornwood Hall's mysteries laid bare for all to see. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The stillness of early evening cloaked Thornwood Hall in a contemplative hush, as though the walls themselves absorbed the echoes of recent calamities. Within the drawing-room, Lady Winifred Carrington, Professor Aldred, and Clarissa Ashcombe sat together by the hearth, the fire's soft glow reflecting in their weary eyes. A sense of relief had settled over them now that the truth lay bare, yet grief lingered at the edges of every glance. Across the room, Inspector Harding conferred quietly with a solicitor over formalities, while Thomas the butler stood by the door, ever vigilant. Hercule Poirot entered, his presence both reassuring and inexorable. In his hand he carried the official docket supplied by Inspector Harding, the charges, the statements, and the coroner's report. He placed the papers on a side table, then turned to the small gathering. Mes amis, the wheels of justice are set in motion. Dr. Pembroke and Mrs. Finch will face trial in London at the Old Bailey. Their confessions, combined with our evidence, ensure a verdict both swift and certain. Lady Winifred drew in a breath, smoothing the lace of her mourning dress. Monsieur Poirot, how shall I proceed? Sylvia's estate, the engagement, the future? Poirot offered a gentle smile. The will is clear. Lady Sylvia Carrington named you sole heir and guardian of her estate. With Pembroke and Finch removed, the charitable endowment specified in her draft letters shall proceed under your careful oversight. Professor Aldred and Clarissa likewise retain their academic and personal reputations, now unsullied by association with darker deeds. Professor Aldred exhaled, relief evident in his posture. Thank you, monsieur. I was so afraid my career would be forever tainted. And mine, Clarissa added, voice soft. I feared my errors would overshadow my intentions. Poirot inclined his head. Your intentions, madame, were misguided but not malicious. Your role in forging the threat note, though reckless, stemmed from loyalty to your friend. The law will treat that with due discretion. He paused, surveying the faces of those present. Yet let us not forget the lessons imparted by this tragedy, that secrets left unspoken and fears unvoiced can fester into catastrophe. Lady Winifred dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Sylvia always believed in honesty, even when it pained her. I shall honour her memory by living in her light. Poirot's eyes gleamed with approval. A fitting tribute, madame. Now, if I may, a final piece of counsel. He moved to the mantel and lifted a framed photograph of Sylvia, captured in laughter at last year's gala. Keep this before you as a reminder of her spirit, bright, courageous, and unbowed by adversity. Let her memory guide your decisions. He set the photograph back gently. And you, Professor Aldred, continue your scholarly pursuits with renewed integrity. Clarissa, may your compassion find more prudent expression henceforth. For each of you has witnessed how knowledge, emotion, and fear, when entwined, may yield bitter fruits, but reason and empathy, when balanced, yield healing. Harding approached, clearing his throat. Monsieur Poirot, the constable is ready to escort you to the station for your formal statement. Then, with your leave, I shall convey the final documents to London. Poirot nodded. Bien sûr, Inspector. My deductions await their official record. He turned once more to the group. Mes amis, I bid you good evening. May Thornwood Hall find peace at last. He touched his cane lightly on the Persian rug, then departed with Inspector Harding. In the corridor, the detective paused at the top of the grand staircase, gazing down at the portraits of generations past. Noble faces that had weathered time's storms. He offered a small, satisfied smile and descended, vanishing into the quiet corridor. Later that night, Lady Winifred sat alone in her sitting room, the crackling fire casting dancing shadows upon the walls. Professor Aldred and Clarissa had retired to the guest wing, leaving her with the solitude she both craved and feared. She drew Sylvia's engagement ring from its velvet box, a ring now symbolizing loss rather than promise. With trembling fingers, she slipped it onto her own necklace chain, letting it rest near her heart. "Dear child," she whispered into the silence, "your light shines still." She closed her eyes, envisioning Poirot's poised form, his calm assurance that justice would prevail. From his little grey cells, the truth had been wrested and set free. And now, Lady Winifred vowed to honour Sylvia's legacy: transparency in governance, compassion in leadership, and unwavering dedication to truth. The following morning, as the first golden rays of sunrise touched the dewy gardens of Thornwood Hall, a carriage rolled down the long drive, carrying Inspector Harding and Dr. Pembroke to the London station. Mrs. Eleanor Finch followed, escorted by a plainclothes constable. Inside the hall, life resumed its gentle rhythms. Thomas greeted the gardener in the courtyard and discussed the repositioning of new rose bushes, a small step toward renewal. In the library, Professor Aldred and Clarissa reviewed plans for Sylvia's charitable gala, determined to fulfill her vision in her honour. Lady Winifred supervised the installation of a gardenia arbour near the west terrace, the white blooms nodding in the breeze as if in solemn acknowledgement. At a window overlooking the gardens, a quiet figure stood, Poirot, preparing to depart. Inspector Harding approached, tipping his hat. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, once again. Your brilliance has restored order in this house." Poirot smiled, lifting his own hat in salute. "It is my greatest pleasure, Inspector. The triumph of justice is its own reward." He paused, gazing out. May Thornwood Hall's future be as bright as its dawn. With that he turned and walked toward the waiting carriage, his work complete, his reputation sealed by yet another triumph of the mind and the heart. As the carriage rolled away, Lady Winifred, Professor Aldred and Clarissa stood at the hall's portico, watching until the wheels turned beyond the gate. Then, hand in hand, they turned toward the rose bushes and gardenia arbour, symbols of new beginnings, and stepped forward into the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Chapter 18. The Closing Remark. The following morning dawned crisp and clear over Thornwood Hall, the mist of grief lifted at last by the warm promise of sunlight. In the grand drawing-room, now returned to its usual splendour, Lady Winifred Carrington, Professor Marcus Aldred, and Clarissa Ashcombe gathered once more. On a small table before them lay the fresh trial documents, embossed indictments and sealed commissions awaiting signatures, symbols that justice would take its course and clarity would endure. The distant rumble of carriage wheels carried Dr. Pembroke and Mrs. Finch away, their fates assigned to courts beyond these well-worn corridors. Hercule Poirot, standing near the tall sash windows, watched the trio with satisfaction. His little grey cells had triumphed, weaving together every slender thread of evidence into a tapestry of truth. He now prepared his final words, a reflection on human nature and the cautionary note he had long wished to impart. Lady Winifred rose to greet him, her posture steadier than it had been since Sylvia's fall. Monsieur Poirot, I cannot thank you enough. Your methods, so intricate, so precise, have brought peace to our hearts. What remains is to honour Sylvia's memory and rebuild our lives. Poirot inclined his head, offering a gentle bow. Madame, it is not I who brings peace, but truth itself. In revealing the hidden design, we free the spirit from shadows. Your daughter believed in clarity and compassion, qualities I trust will guide you henceforth. Professor Aldred stepped forward, a small leather case in hand. Monsieur, Sylvia entrusted me with these, the notes of her final recital and her private reflections, now fully released for you to return. He handed the folders to Poirot, who accepted them with characteristic courtesy. As you wish, Professor, Poirot replied, glancing briefly at the elegant handwriting within. May these writings inspire those who read them, and remind us that creativity and integrity walk hand in hand. Clarissa, still bearing the faint pallor of recent ordeal, approached hesitantly. Monsieur Poirot, I fear that my friendship with Sylvia was imperfect, tainted by my secrecy and rash actions. How might I atone? Poirot offered a compassionate smile. Madame, your heart was loyal, albeit misguided. True atonement lies in service to the ideals Sylvia held dear. I understand you and Professor Aldred intend to proceed with her charitable gala? She nodded. We do, monsieur. It will raise funds for the Thornwood Relief Society in her honour. Then you have found your path, Poirot said. By fulfilling her vision, you transform regret into legacy. In that, you honour her more than any apology can express. A serene pause fell among them, broken only by the distant chiming of the grandfather clock. Poirot turned toward the room's mirror, where his reflection stared back, immaculate cravat, polished cane, and the keen eyes of a detective who had once again navigated beyond the surface of appearances. Before I depart, he said, his voice carrying a light amusement, allow me a final observation. He tapped the polished wood of the mantel. Thornwood Hall, like any human heart, is composed of beauty and flaw in equal measure. The stones and the souls within bear scars, some visible, some hidden. When secrets fester, even the most noble facade can crumble. Yet when truth is guided by empathy, even the deepest wounds may heal. Lady Winifred laid a comforting hand on his arm. You speak wisdom, monsieur. We shall remember. Poirot bowed once more. Then my task is complete. He moved to the door, cane clicking softly on the parquet. At the threshold he paused, turning for a final glance. Mes amis, he said, the case of the Gardenia that didn't wilt is closed. May Thornwood Hall stand as a testament to the power of reason and the necessity of compassion. And may you, each in your own way, cultivate gardens of honesty in the days to come. With that, he stepped onto the grand staircase, descending into the hall below. As he passed under the archway, Lady Winifred, Professor Aldred, and Clarissa watched in respectful silence, knowing that his departure marked both an end and a beginning. An end to fear and deception, and a beginning of renewal and hope. And so, with the final echo of his cane's tap, Hercule Poirot left Thornwood Hall behind, his little grey cells already poised toward the next mystery where logic, insight, and the gentle art of understanding would once again prevail.